for folks. My name is Jay Paquette. I'm the State of Michigan's Radioactive Materials Unit Supervisor. And I served this last year as the E48 Task Force Chairperson, who was responsible for developing some guidance and best practices for the DOT special permits 10656 and 11406 process, which ended up turning into a practice of actually updating the forms and then also including a new guidance document associated with that that new process form amendment that we submitted to the DOT, or the CRCPD submitted back earlier this year. So today I'll run through the guidance document, but before we get diving into the content of that document, I provided 2 links in the chat. If folks want to pull those up, if they want to follow along at all through the process, those links will go to each of the 2 DOT special permit forms. Again, 11406 and 10656. The forms themselves are identical in content. As we'll see through the process, they just have a slightly different application and use. Like I said, we'll run through the presentation. If folks have questions, I'm kind of managing this a little bit on the backside, trying to watch chat and also any hands that go up. So feel free to unmute and just interrupt if there are any questions. I do have, I think, enabled that folks can go ahead and just unmute and have a discussion with us about any questions. So that'll go ahead and dive right in. Like I said, the guidance document is intended to actually provide input and clarification on things that have historically been challenging or not intuitive in the old form, but in the amended form, there's actually 6 sections that it's been broken down into phases that are hopefully more natural as far as how we process this approval in actuality. Again, if there's a conflict though, the DOT special permit that has been approved by the DOT does take precedence over this guidance document if there does happen to be a conflict. As always, try to throw in some definitions for folks so that there's clarification about what we're talking about, especially when we've tried to introduce some clarity around the different facilities and states that exist throughout this process. The approval number, which will kind of get used synonymously with the DOT special permit often, is that unique character of state, year, and number that's issued for a particular conveyance. I just saw a question about the PowerPoint. Yeah, this will actually be updated to the CRCPD transportation page. So this will be not only distributed, but available to everyone in the long term. But thank you, that's a good question. So the remainder ones are just kind of clarification for folks when we talk about destination, detection, or origin state. This is just saying, what do we mean by that when we're talking about it in the form's content? And then again, transit state is also included in there. Since we'd like to give them a polite heads up that there's going to be a transport or a carrier traveling through their state, even though they may not be directly affected. Common list acronyms most of us should be familiar with. I realize there are potentially individuals on the call that are not with state agencies or directly with CRCPD. So those are just thrown in here for folks to understand what different group or organization or acronym is being represented. So the big thing is, when are these actually needed? That comes up a lot. And the big thing is, these are required when radiation is detected unexpectedly in a load that may be in transit or at its destination. And this, the DOT special permit authorizes return shipment to either the origin or other appropriate location for identification and disposition purposes. There's 2 different numbers, as I alluded to earlier, 10656. That particular form is intended to be used for scrap metal loads, and 11406 is intended for liquid or solid waste. And we'll see in a moment a few exceptions to those particular, well, to the liquid or solid waste. On slide 6, this one may be one to hang on to for folks. This is kind of the general process overview, is how we expect to see those 6 sections of the form to work through it and the things that precede it and follow it. Again, it kind of kicks off with item 1, radiation's detected in the shipment. Was it unexpected or unidentified? All right. No, and no special permits required. And again, there's some other ways that you can actually determine that something's not suitable for a DOT SP. For instance, you'll see in item 9, household waste. Household waste is explicitly not included in the DOT SP process. So again, you could kind of follow this through. It's a standard character and imagery process, the diamonds meaning questions and decision points, and then just actions to be taken. This is, like I said, something that's nice to maybe hang on to. The numbers are there to help folks be able to reference a particular step when talking to somebody else. Just try to improve communication processes. Those aren't referenced anywhere else in the process, with the exception of just noting in section, or in item 12, for instance, complete section 1. So that does refer specifically to the form. So here, this is where having that form handy might help you see where each piece of the form gets completed. Because again, this guidance document doesn't go into the detail of every single field that's on the form, but it covers some of the harder points or things that are sometimes more controversial, if you will. And so section 1 is really details of the detection site, the materials, origin, and destination. This can be filled out as it states on the slide by the detection facility or the detection state official if the facility is seeking assistance or maybe they don't have the capability to fill out the form. I know that varies from state to state, so that's why we left that, kind of option in place. But typically, and almost always, the information that's put on the form is collected by the detection facility. You're going to need somebody, of course, that's on site with that facility with the piece of equipment that was responsible for detecting the radioactive material that set the alarm off. Again, in this process, you're going to get that information, determine if 10656 or 11406 is the appropriate form to be used, and then each subsection will be completed. A big update to this form that folks will notice is that we no longer use fax as the primary mode of communication, and that's been amended to use email. Note that there is an exception to still use fax. Please put that in the email section or entry field if that's the preferred method of communication for that individual. The other thing that is important is if it's going to be filled out by the detection facility, they need to be able to contact their state official. And so there's a link to the list of authorized individuals to review these forms and approvals. So we'll come back to that list a little bit later as well. So again, just a little highlight of the section that's being filled out for section 1. Again, at least one mode of contact is required: phone, email, fax, some way to get in contact with that person. And then again, the more important piece that sometimes does get a little sticky is the actual survey measurement itself. So we're interested in getting the survey date, the time, a background reading, and then also the max reading and cab reading. So there are some modifications to the form in this section, again, from what folks have seen in the past. The main one being that we've allowed the use of 2 different units to be used. I think a lot of us have seen that microröntgen or microrem or millirem and milliröntgen get confused a lot in industry, and so sometimes it's nice to be able to have the drop-down option so that it's perhaps more intentional. I will note it's important to realize that we still don't want to be using CPS. If the unit of measurement is, or if CPS is the only unit of measurement available in a device that's doing the survey of the conveyance, that number just simply needs to be utilized with an appropriate conversion factor. If that's to be done, remarks just need to be made in section 5, just further down in the document, about how that conversion was accomplished. There's nothing about necessarily being super accurate. It's just so that when it gets to the destination state official or facility, they have some expectation of what was completed by the initial survey individual. And then again, the next section or the next portion of section 1 is just carrier information. So again, this is pretty self-explanatory, but it's the company responsible for actually moving that conveyance back and forth. We did provide a little bit of suggested language for certain sections, specifically vehicle type, whether it's a dump, tandem, flatbed, and a vehicle ID, because there's always been kind of a question, what do we mean by vehicle ID? So we gave, again, some examples there, but the important thing is if there's some unique characteristic, series of numbers, letters, or other identifying factors that can be utilized in the event that it needs to get tracked down, that's possible to do. And then another explanation for the contact person with that carrier. And you'll see too, there's the shipment origin. We don't get into the details about how to fill it out. Again, where did it come from? It just needs to be filled out there. So moving to section 2. This one is completed by the state detection state official. The intent here, again, is that they probably have better idea of who's appropriate to use as a point of contact on the list that's provided in the link under the process details. That individual, or maybe it's a group of individuals that's completing this portion, needs to obviously fill out number 5, which we'll get to. I'll show the next page here. Just a couple more, so I'll skip that. They're going to, if you're following along in the form, they're going to fill out their own information, their origin state official, identify whether or not there are transit state officials that need to be identified. So are there states in between the detection and destination? And then, of course, the destination state official. One big suggested point that has come up during this review process is that we want to make positive contact with the destination state official prior to authorization and signing the approval. Reason being, a lot of the time these conveyances will get sent back and it's shot in a fax machine, and on many of us these days are not going into offices or working in different modals of operation. And so we want to ensure that that's getting in the hands of somebody who's going to be able to respond according to their own internal state policy and procedure. There are some opportunities too in the form to check boxes so you're not continually repeating the same thing over and over again. So for instance, if it's internal, let's say I have something detected in Detroit, Michigan, and it's getting kicked back to Grand Rapids, my destination state is the same as my origin state. I'm going to click the box that says check if the same as official, check if same as origin state official. Again, that just allows me to kind of expedite completing the form. And you'll see that repeated throughout this, this document. That individual is also going to be responsible for issuing the actual approval number. It is explicit in the DOT special permit approval that we use this exact sequence, which is 2-character state abbreviation for detection, then destination state. So again, if we use my example, it would be MI, the 2-year character abbreviation for the present year, in this case 23, and the 3-digit sequential number. We do acknowledge that there is a likelihood and a potential for there to be duplicate special permit approval numbers for 10656 and 11406. As you'll see later in this presentation, there are actually 2 separate locations to upload those forms on the CRCPD transportation page. So that gets us to section 3. And section 3 is where the detection state official is ensuring that all the information is complete and that it's getting the final approval and signature for transportation. We want to make sure, again, that everything in section 1 has been completed satisfactorily, that the external surface of the conveyance is below 50 mrem per hour, and the occupied space, or cab, is below 2 mrem per hour. If those conditions are not met, it's outside of the scope of the DOT special permit. An internal state policy and procedure should be followed, either state or other agency, whether it's territory as well, or a tribal unit. Again, we need to review that the load's not dispersible and doesn't present any risk beyond the transport of the material within normal regulations, and then the permit can be signed. Upon signing it, that's where we bounce down a little bit to section 6. Section 6 is the documentation of transmittal, and so that's going to just simply get a date. And again, there's a whole lot of reference circled numbers, but those just indicate who you need to send that back out to. And again, there's going to be that opportunity to check boxes, so it may be a very small list of numbers, especially if the destination and origin or destination and detection state are the same state. Again, that checkbox for 8 still is present. And so in my Michigan example, both checkboxes for 7 and 8 would be selected as same as 5. That last comment there, if the permit process is initiated but not completed, we still want to issue a permit number or an approval number. There's a special conditions section of this guidance document. We will want to ensure that we capture as much information as possible and still transmit that to the CRCPD. The USDOT has requested that we start to compile a list of partially completed or unable to close permits, which we'll see again later, into a quarterly summary that they can then start to identify habitual issues or things that need to be addressed in a different manner. So that's section 3. There's some additional notes that folks need to be aware of, which again has to do with 10D. It requires the conveyance be marked with a specific language, DOT SP 11406 or 10656, and radioactive on 2 opposing sides. I'll note that the 2 links that I provided to folks do include sheets that are compliant with that requirement on the last 2 pages. Those should autofill if the approval number is filled out correctly. If folks are using the links that have the entire DOT special permit approval that was signed with the language that includes everything from the US DOT, those 2 marking pages are not included as the DOT does not officially review and approve that portion. There are options for compliance for that requirement. It does not have to meet that exact format, but it does need those words and numbers included. It's helpful to include those markings, so it's recommended that the approving radiation control official keep that with the transmittal package upon completing section 3. Again, those 2 links that are provided that you see on the screen kick you back to the 2 that I provided in the chat. This is just a bounce down to section 6, like I mentioned, just simply entering a date and saving that prior to emailing that or again faxing if that's the preferred method of communication. I think many of us are over to using email now. So this is kind of an intermediate portion, which is the permit use in transit. There's really not a whole lot having to do with the form at that point, but it's the detection facility and carrier. They're going to provide this form and the approval, the markings for both sides of the conveyance, and then that carrier is going to just transit the load or conveyance to the facility that has been identified that can handle the identification and disposition recommendations as needed. The key one there, and if you go back to slide 6, which has that workflow, the big thing is if there's an accident en route, the driver is responsible for reporting that incident to the National Response Center, and the DOT SP is paused at that moment, and that process is followed and takes precedence. So once the conveyance arrives at its destination, we are now over to section 4, and it's back to the destination state or the disposition state official. And again, there's a note there that says often the same as destination state official. There are certainly circumstances in which a shipment will end up in a state that is neither the origin or the detection state, and so or it may be a different official within the destination state. So there are certain circumstances where we wanted these individuals to be different. But again, that checkbox is present if they're the same as the destination state official. That's typically the case for this. Usually, at least in our case, for Michigan and many of the folks that served on the task force, a lot of information is going to be provided by that destination facility. They're going to get the conveyance back, unload it, work to identify it. However, there are facilities that have no capabilities, no equipment, and really are uncomfortable with doing that on their own. So there are certain, follow individual state protocol and procedures, and agency protocol and procedures to handle those particular instances. So the key thing is, assist in determining the appropriate disposition if appropriate, and complete Section 4 to the best of your ability. We're asking that folks start to include the radionuclide instead of just being ambiguous, scale, norm. If we can include things like radium-226, that's helpful. And there may not be a radionuclide listed in the drop-down menu in that section. So please just follow the format that's listed to the right-hand side, like lutetium-177, for instance. Disposition details. There's all sorts of stuff that can go there. Use your judgment, but it could be as simple as it's stored in place for future disposal, but for the purposes of the permit and the approval, it's closed. There is a special condition, again, if folks are not able to identify and provide complete closure with a known radionuclide. Sometimes there are instances where agencies don't have the ability to work with a destination facility, or they're non-responsive. You name it, this gets quite complicated quite quickly, and so there is an exception for that a little later on. Again, once the identification disposition has been done, enter the date in Section 6, and then also that same date often in the lower portion, which is the transmittal of this form to the DOT, to the transportation page on CRCPD. I'll note too in this section, there's a slight modification in that the CRCPD used to be notified actually at that first shipment approval stage. We have parsed down the responsibility, or the burden, if you will, to one transmittal. And so it's especially important that the destination state officials, and especially the disposition individuals, complete the form and upload it, or transmit it to CRCPD. So we'll run through the preferred method. I did check this yesterday to ensure that this is still a usable workflow, but this is subject to change with modifications to the website, which I think Bruce and team are still potentially working on throughout the coming days and months. So this is kind of the step-by-step, but I'm going to bounce down a slide because I've thrown some images in there for folks to be able to utilize. But if you're logged into the CRCPD page, on the top right, there's Manage Profile, and you'll see it scrolled down on the page a little ways. There's an option to click on your groups. Within your groups, you'll see transportation for your given state that you're a member of. And once you're there, there's group pages, and you can click, again, that state. And I realize I'm going through this quite quickly, and that this may be hard to keep up with. So if we need to come back to this at the end for folks to kind of practice, that's fine. We can do that. You'll then see that there are two sections, and if folks have uploaded DOT special permit approvals previously, they'll see a list of those forms, the previous uploaded forms, under these two headers. And actually, I've just noticed there's a typo in that one. We'll get that corrected. To the right-hand side, you'll see a link that says Add to File. It'll bring up a pop-up menu where it's just going to simply be a file option, and you'll upload that final form with all of the information completed. Hopefully that disposition and identification's been properly completed and filled out. Name that file the approval number. So state, year, dash, incremented number. You will have to click the I agree with terms and simply submit, and that'll be uploaded. From there, Bruce and team and Russ Meyer will be able to access that form and process it into the database for statistical reasons and tracking and reporting to the DOT. There is a secondary option, which is to email Bruce and Russ, and you can click that link. It should, if it all works correctly, pop up a link to email the two of them with an email title, something to the effect of DOT special permit, and then you can just attach it like normal as a PDF. And lastly, there is still the option to fax that form to the CRCPD. So this comes to the special conditions portion. There are DOT special permits that may be initiated but not completed. And one key example is a drive-off. We'll often get a call from a facility. In my case, it's often days later, so it's very difficult to do anything with it. But somebody will say, hey, somebody set off our portal alarm, and they drove away. We'd like to start to capture that. So the guidance for that is just to simply complete as much of Section 1 as possible. We acknowledge there is a whole heck of a lot of information that may not be able to be captured. But even if you could get the portal monitor levels, the screening information, a truck ID, just even the company, any particular identifier would be helpful. And fill out that section as much as possible. And then when you get to Section 3, if you look next to the signature box on Section 3, there is a little checkbox that states DOT SP process initiated but not completed. Provide comments in Section 5. And so for folks that have that document open, if you simply click that box, even in the web view, it should overwrite the signature block that says DOT SP initiated but not completed, or something to that effect. That again prevents the fact that a signature could be put in place there. So please just be sure that folks use that. Thanks. It's DOT SP not issued. Thank you for clarifying what language was used. I could not recall that off the top of my head. That then can just be saved with the comments that folks can add into Section 5, and then again transmit that to CRCPD through the normal transmittal methods. That little link just kicks you back up a few slides in this presentation. And the big thing, though, is we ask that folks not directly send them to DOT. That is a specific request from them. They're not going to be able to respond to each individual instance of drive-offs or things that don't quite happen the way that we expect or hope them to. The exception to that is if anything is super egregious, follow your internal protocol, again, for response of things that may be of elevated nature or require immediate response. Again, that's kind of stated at the bottom there. So in this, again, is kind of a special condition, but it's not a condition where a DOT SP is not issued, but it allows closure without identification and disposition. As I mentioned earlier, there's oftentimes that we get loads back to our jurisdictions where we want to work with an entity to try to help identify and properly dispose of material, but we can't quite do that. Either they're not cooperative, they don't have any interest in working with folks, or maybe they figured it out and just took care of it themselves. Either way, perhaps that information is not getting back to the destination and identification state, organization, or official. And so again, make the notes and the efforts that were made in Section 5, stating to the effect that you couldn't do the identification and disposition, close it, and again, transmit it via the normal transmittal methods. So again, we'd still like them to be closed so that CRCPD has that full list of DOT SPs, especially since we're doing that transmittal only once, which is at the closure end. So this is kind of a resource-based section, requesting changes to authorized users. The template is provided. It's just an Excel file. CRCPD program directors can complete that and simply email it. So his email, again, is listed there. Noting that authorized users are individuals trained and certified by program directors. I suggest and we recommended that this document, the guidance document PowerPoint, be used as a training aid to help folks work through the process in conjunction with actually working through the form. Again, we ordered a lot of it in hopes that it flows a little better. It's a touch more intuitive for folks as to how we're interacting with companies and corporations out there trying to get things done in an expedited manner. So this, again, special provisions guidance. Excuse me, there are additional requirements for the state radioactive materials control officials. That's under 8C. So take those for what they are. It's helpful if you are communicating this with entities in your state that may have photo monitors, especially. Let them know what are the policies and procedures within your jurisdiction for normal business hours. How should they work with you outside of that, overnight, 24 hours, weekends? Some of these facilities are running 24 hours a day, so they'd like to have a response and support accordingly. So that's kind of just a note to those of you on the call that are with the CRCPD entities. Try to work with your local population to try to make this a seamless process for folks. And again, the link to the transportation page is there. That's where you can find most of these permits, and you'll be able to find this document later. And then very last portion, the helpful links, just kind of for folks to be able to have them. It has to do with 49 CFR, if people are interested in going and picking through that. Of course, the transportation page. There has been questions about DOT, this 11406 letter of interpretation. That is something that folks wanted a link to, so we put it there. The authorized user list, which could periodically get